Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is April 22nd, 2021, and I am sitting here in my office in the nice outside studio, although I'll be moving back inside the other studio as soon as I finish some computer stuff. And I figured it's about time for us to have an AMA. How about that? It has been a little bit of time. We've been really, really busy. We were setting up the Africa special. It's Thursday, the 29th. Yes, we do have a lot of announcements and things, and it's not just Ethiopia. We're actually covering the entire continent of Africa because we have deals all across and projects all across and lots of fun things to announce and do, and just a discussion about how we've approached business there and built relationships there. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as we enjoyed making it. I filmed some segments and did a panel today, and everybody's just trying to get all their stuff in line and coordinating that, especially for in-person recordings and during the time of COVID, is very difficult. We've had a lot of journalists we've talked to as well. The panel today was moderated by someone from the Financial Times. Boy, that was fun. We'll also have some updates about Cardano itself at the end of the month as well. We're kind of converting the 360 episode to the Africa special. So there'll be some 360 news, and then there'll be the Africa special stuff. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Software side is coming along very well. We just keep chipping away at it. We just keep adding resources. We just keep delivering. A lot of code has been written this month. A lot more code will be written next month. Bluetooth Pioneers program is rolling along. 1,500 people in it. I think we're in week 3, if I recall. And we're getting a lot of feedback, some negative, some positive, mostly positive. Negative stems around documentation or just the fact that it sometimes takes a little time to get a question answered because there's 1,500 people in one Lars. So you imagine how difficult that one is. But they're getting it done little by little. 8 development companies, I think, are all tasked with various things. And when the Bluetooth testnet hits, it's going to be balls to the wall. So I don't envy the workload there, but we scaled up accordingly, and it's very exciting to see these pieces come together. Catalyst is still working. The Voltaire project is still working. There's so many moving pieces to all of this. Unfortunately, politically, the United States is not in good strides at the moment. We're still in the middle of a pandemic without an end in sight, and no one's being intellectually honest about things. And that's a source of endless frustration. Looks like the corporate tax rate for offshore corporate taxes is going to double. It looks like my personal taxes are going to double as well with the latest tax proposal. My capital gains is going from 20% to, I guess, 43.5%. And of course, people don't understand history anymore or why we do what we do. And looks like Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico, but Washington, D.C. might become a state. The whole point of Washington, D.C. is it's not supposed to be a state, or otherwise it would just been part of Maryland or Virginia. But I guess we're just going to ignore the whole point of Washington, D.C. and history of the Republic for raw political power. Why not? So a lot of depressing shit coming down the pipe there that really pisses me off. And it just, it's an endless river, that one. Why do we pay taxes when we can print trillions of dollars? And why do we pay taxes when the military budget continues to go up? Never goes down. Is what it is. Well, anyway, let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's get to your questions. The AMAs are about you guys, not about me. And let's see what you guys have for this. This dip is scaring me. I'm panic buying. Well, you guys pay too much attention to the price. What goes up goes down. You can't predict these prices, and there's too many moving factors, especially if capital gains double. It's going to be devastating for the markets. They're going to collapse. Charles, what's in the wooden frame on the safe behind you? So that's a special sculpture. It's a kinetic sculpture, and it has these feathers, and they look like they're underwater, moving at a very slow speed, but actually they're vibrating at a very fast speed to replicate that. I like kinetic art. Is it true that there are only 8 Cardano nodes currently in Africa? No, that's a lie. Whoever you heard that from is an idiot. There might be 8 relays running in Africa, but that's different from nodes. There's probably thousands of them. But people lie. People just relentlessly lie. And there's no consequences for lying in our industry. What about those books? That over there is the Art of Programming from Donald Knuth. Every office has to have one, but I actually have a new book here. It's recently sent to me. It is from Joel David Hampkins. Thank you, Hampkins, for the book. Lectures on the Philosophy of Mathematics. Looks like a really exciting read. And actually, it covers a lot of different topics, from incompleteness to set theory. And there's everything you expect. Stuff on Cantor and Frege, separation axiom, extensionality, replacement axiom, large cardinals, continuum hypothesis. Ooh, that's exciting. Multiverse view. Does mathematics need new axioms? That's an interesting chapter. Geometry, infinity. I'm a bit of an ultra finitist, so it's nice to have an infinity chapter. Proofs, computability. Computability is generally not a topic in a historical philosophy of mathematics, but it's nice to see it in this. Rigor. Ooh, that's exciting. Let's see here. Numbers. We even have a section on Dedekind cuts. It's going to be fun. So I'm looking forward to reading it on my copious spare time that I have. Capital gains increase likely will not pass, right? No, it will pass. That was the consequence of Georgia. What's so depressing about that? Divided government is government of compromise, not a government of monoculture. And unfortunately, because there's a political monopoly, all these things are going to pass through. JavaScript course update. Thank you so much for mentioning that, Matthew Dolan. So I am going to create an introduction to programming, introduction to computer science class. And the idea was to actually go from first principles. And I kind of wanted to roll up what Nanda Shawkin did with Nanda Tetris and work my way to JavaScript as the lingua franca, and then do a collection of applications. And one would be in a web scraper, just to show people how to interface with a headless browser and scrape the web and actually manipulate a DOM, because that's a very useful skill set. Then the other would be some form of AI, maybe like a chat bot or something involving machine learning. So there were some clever ideas there, and then something involving algorithmic music. I thought were 3 really good use cases to show people a collection of skill sets to really get good at programming. So with my copious free time, after I finished that lectures of mathematics book, right? I would create something like this, and it'd be really cool to do it from a functional style. So use Ramda and JS Verify for property-based testing, which is quick check, and show people that there are different ways to do it. And there's some great source material. I emailed the authors of Eloquent JavaScript, which is in its 3rd edition. I think they're just about to make a 4th edition. And the pedagogy and JavaScript in particular has gotten very, very good. You can do a functional style. You can do an object-oriented style. And actually, there's a sister language called TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, which can teach you a lot about working with types and testing with types and so forth. So I really do want to make a class like that. And it would be a heck of a lot of fun to do a class like that. There was also some discussion about potentially doing some native code for Cardano as a node application, potentially even a full node as a JavaScript node application. And if that's the case, then there could be a blockchain component in such a class. I just don't have the time. Starting a biotechnology company with my brother, and I got a ranch up in Wyoming in addition to the farm here in Colorado. And there's just so much stuff right now in the pipeline. But it is something that I'll do alongside that follow-up lecture for information security and a few other projects I have. In fact, I wanted to do a whole Udemy course on Infinity. And when I'm a little older and IO Global is a little further along, I think these are the projects I'll do for Sanity. More TED Talks. I've been invited back, and that's definitely something I'll do next year. Where do you find hope in difficult times? This is a good one. You know, everything in life, no matter how difficult life happens to be, there's probably some time in human history that was far, far, far more difficult than the time we're encountering. If you don't believe me, look up the year 536. That probably was the worst year of AD. It was horrible. Volcanic eruption blotted out the sun, which created famine and global vitamin D deficits. And as a consequence, a pandemic broke out, which killed probably 10%, 20% of the entire human population. And it spread like wildfire everywhere. Wars were everywhere. The Byzantine Empire basically didn't get to reunify the Western Empire, and it changed the whole trajectory of the world. And it took about a century for Europe in particular to recover, but it was a global phenomena. And that was just 1 year. And then you look at the reign of Marcus Aurelius, there was a plague during that. And that's one of the reasons the Roman Empire collapsed was because of that event. And then you have the plague of Athens. There's a lot of plagues in human history. So many, many difficult times. 20th century was riddled with them. So we look to 2020 and 2021. These are not especially difficult. We still live in a time of plenty. If you're from a developed country, you probably still can eat. You probably still have a job. And even if you don't have a job, there's at least hope you'll get one in a reasonable period of time. And yeah, markets go down and sometimes cynicism comes in. I think we have a different epidemic, and that's one of a loss of meaning. People are struggling to find what to do and where to go and how to live life. Uh, the reality is that there's no clear rites of passage and divisions. When my grandfather on my mom's side was growing up, it was very clear what you did. You graduated from high school and you marry your high school sweetheart, or you very quickly get married. You get a job, you work at that same job, you work your way up, you start a family, you take care of that family, and you stay up with your peer group. And if there's a war, you go and fight in that war, and then you come home and restart the process. And that's exactly what he did. Graduated from high school, went and fought in the Korean War, and when he got out, married, raised 7 kids, 5 boys, 2 girls, my mom amongst them. And he worked his way up, became a big guy in the cable business. That was how life was supposed to work. And for many, many Americans and many people in the world, that was the standard. Now we live in a period where graduate from college, you move back in with your parents. It's not clear where to go, what to do. Marriage rates are down, rites of passage are down, and there's a loss of faith. Wherever you stand on faith, faith gives people purpose and meaning, and it structures their lives and gives them rites of passage. When you rob them of that and the dignity of work and the belief that society is just or that there is a place for you in the world, then you end up having a loss of hope directly connected to a loss of meaning. And so I think the antidote for that is to start from first principles. Read the Stoic philosophers, Epictetus and Seneca and Aurelius and these others. Think a little bit about alternative ways of looking at the world, not to adopt the philosophy, but just to expand your mind, learn about Ikigai and Buddhism and Taoism. Find inspiration, find role models, find people that did things that were quite interesting. Postmodernism and this social justice phenomena, one of the most dangerous and pernicious things is the death of veneration. There's this bizarre notion that if someone has done something despicable in their life, any other thing that they've done, no matter how grand and great, is automatically discounted. So, for example, if you're founding father of the United States, but you had slaves, you're an evil man. And there's nothing you can do or have done that is ever redeemable. You can write the Constitution, you can write the Declaration of Independence, you can have fought epic battles and showed enormous bravery. But apparently, one thing is irredeemable. And that's not how life works. People are combinations of vile behavior and epic behavior. And the greater the person, the larger those extremes will be. If you ever go to Mongolia, Genghis Khan was a warlord. He killed lots of people, probably over 1 million once you rack it all up. On the other hand, few people have conquered a third of the world and built an empire as vast as his and unified the world in the way that he did. So is he an evil man? Was he a great man? It's some combination of the two. And so when you look for meaning in life, you look for people who have done great things and great evil, and you try to understand that and try to fit it in and try to ascribe those motives. And then you put that into some ethical framework that allows you to sort out the good and the bad and decide what to borrow and what to take. And then it allows you to navigate things in such a way that you ultimately can find your meaning and your purpose. And then, once you have meaning and purpose, you have hope, because hope comes from the ability to find that meaning, the ability to achieve that meaning, whatever it is you have set. And it doesn't have to be world changing and grand. It could be as small as, I want to take care of my community. There are so many people that, like, for example, my ranch, it's in Wyoming nearby Wheatland, small town, very small town. You could make your entire life's work just trying to make that town a little bit better. If you see something go out of business, try to find a business to replace it, or just service to others, small service, big service, helping the elderly, whatever it might be. That is the key. And then the hope is the ability to continue doing those things that you love. And if you're looking for inspiration, look to the past, because humans have been around for a long time, and there's plenty of people to look at and admire and respect the great things that they've done and gain wisdom from the bad things that they've done, and try to understand why they did those things. What were the motivations behind them? A lack of wisdom comes from repeating the mistakes of the past. And if you don't understand motives, it's difficult. So that's how I find hope. And it's given me a tremendous amount of clarity. I've noticed a lot of the criticism I've received has come from a lack of empathy. A lot of the criticism I've received has come from a lack of maturity with people. And I find myself pitying people more than anything else and feeling sorry for them, that they have such a narrow view or such a sad view or closed view, and wishing them well, hoping that they can find a way to mature and grow up and broaden themselves. Because at the end of the day, I can't imagine how bad and sad and unfulfilled those lives must be if they're stuck in that rut and that perception. Chris Spencer, aloha Charles, aloha and mahalo. Love Hawaii. I was born on Maui. How did Ron Paul inspire you? That's a fun one. Ron Paul is just pure consistency. And in an age of inconsistency, doublespeak, and hypocrisy, it was so incredibly refreshing to have somebody that what was on the label was actually what was inside the packaging. How often in life do you encounter people again and again and again who say X and then do Y? And then you're told, well, that's just the way the world works. And when you take Ron Paul and you take the packaging off, he says X, he does X. Just that simple. That's who he is. That's how he operates. And that's what the world is all about. And so, anyway, I got a second. My secretary just handed me a note. There we go. It's for later. So, anyway, I love that about him. And it doesn't mean he's God, he's always right. But he had a very simple message and a beautiful message. It was choose liberty, a sound money, and a humble foreign policy. So every single person has liberty and freedom, and respect it and honor it. And don't slice people up into groups and say, well, there's this group and this group and this group. And how do we get more something for this group? And how do we get more for something for this group? Everybody is equal under God and under the law. That's simple for Ron's choose liberty. And sound money, it says, well, you work so hard every day to earn something. Shouldn't the stuff that you earn stay at the value that you earned it? Why should you have to pay this built-in tax where every year the things in your pocket decay in value, in some cases double-digit decay? Look at the price of lumber. You tell me that inflation's at 3%. And the problem is politicians have no incentive to be honest with you, and they'll continue debasing the currency because it's politically convenient. And then a humble foreign policy. The United States should not have military bases in 100 countries. We shouldn't have troops everywhere. We shouldn't be running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, special forces operations, overthrowing governments. We shouldn't be assassinating people. We shouldn't be drone striking people. Basic stuff like that. We don't need an empire. It was never the intention of the founding fathers. It was more be friends with everybody, be neutral, trade, be nice, don't kill people. So that was the baseline of Ron Paul, and he voted that way for over 30 years while he was in the House of Representatives, even when it was politically inconvenient, and he took great criticism for it. And when he ran for president, he had an unwavering commitment to those values. Now, there are certain practical questions and execution questions, and it's absolutely true that there's a difference between philosophy and the execution of philosophy, and compromises must be made. And the one thing he couldn't do was compromise. So for me, it was nice to have someone who refused to compromise, and nice to have someone who was unbending to remind the world that sometimes integrity and principles matter, and changed my life, changed my view on the world, and it made me the person I am today. So even though his presidential campaign was ultimately unsuccessful, he seeded a generation of people that were reminded that liberty matters. And I'll carry that, and many others will, for the rest of their lives. Why Haskell? So Haskell is an interesting one. You can accomplish the things that we want to accomplish with other languages like Idris and Agda and OCaml, and there's certainly many good choices. But regardless of the one you pick, the goal is still the same. We have these papers that we write, Ouroboros and the extended UTXO model and Hydra and Catalyst and all this other stuff, the voting system therein. And those papers contain an enormous amount of sophistication. So people first ask, well, how do you find a developer? Well, hang on a second here. If I hire a C developer, a C++ developer, a Java developer, a C# developer, I might have a much easier time finding him or her. But then what happens when I give that developer the paper and say, here's Ouroboros, tell me how to build it? I'm going to have a much harder time finding a developer who can read that paper, understand that paper, and semantically correctly implement that paper. When you have a Haskell developer, more often than not, they come from the academic world, the scientific world. They're a little brighter than the average bear. Much, much higher probability that that developer will be able to read that paper, understand that paper, translate that paper into code, and that code will run. So it felt natural to me, since we were investing in the science, to bring in a different class of developer and have that developer go and translate the science into Haskell as the reference code. Now, it's entirely true that maybe that is not the code you end up in market with, but it's a lot easier to translate from Haskell to Java than it is to go from science to Java. Much, much easier, because at least you have something running and working. And you, with a little bit of training, about 5 to 10 weeks with a normal developer, they'll know enough about it to be able to read the code, the documentation, and be able to kind of figure out a different way of doing it. And that's exactly what happened with Vincent Henquez and Nicola de Prima in the Cardano Rust code. They looked at the Haskell code, they read it, they understood it, and then they were able to write Rust code. It's significantly harder to take a paper that has mathematical proofs in it, all these formalisms, and just go straight from that to the code. So that's why Haskell, and that alone, while it was very expensive in the beginning and we had to build processes, is now putting us in a very unique competitive position where we're accelerating, and we're accelerating despite the incumbent complexity of Scale and the incumbent complexity of these protocols. Contrast that with our competitors who are mired in complexity, and they keep having product delays like F2 because they're in that position where they're having much more complicated science and protocols but then they don't have that intermediate step that helps them manage that, figure it out, sort it, simplify it, and turn it into something good. So I'm happy with it. I paid the price for it. Whether you thought it was a good idea or not, well, we have the developers now. We have libraries now. It works on Windows now. And we have a great development workflow, and we're releasing code very quickly. Anybody who tells you otherwise, they're just lying to you. Serious question. Are you really 33 years old? Yeah, I was born November 5th, 1987. I'm fasting for Ramadan at the moment. Have you ever done fasting for a whole month? The longest I've done with a fast, extended fast, was 3 weeks. Extended fast means you have no food at all. You just drink water. That's it. It's a water fast. So that was tough, very tough. You have to be a little careful. Take your vitamins during it. Take sodium during it so you don't get terrible headaches. And you have to be a little careful coming off of it to avoid refeeding syndrome. But it's a little different than a religious fast like for Ramadan. But I still have a tremendous amount of respect for people who go through these things. It is not easy in a modern society with a modern diet to detox from all that sugar and get off of it. So kudos to you, Ari, and good luck with it. Do you play StarCraft 2? It was the highest rank game on PC at all. I did play StarCraft 2. It was a great game. We all waited for it. I played the original StarCraft, and I played StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty, and Heart of the Swarm, and Shadows of the Void. I thought that the first version, Wings of Liberty, was just phenomenal. I was okay with Heart of the Swarm, and I was disappointed in Shadows of the Void, whatever it's called, from a plot perspective. But from a game mechanics perspective, StarCraft 2 was great. I think it was a good sequel to StarCraft, unlike Warcraft 3 to Warcraft 2, where with upkeep and all these other things and the over focus on heroes, I think it took a lot out of the mechanics of the game. And that said, I love James Rayner. I love that whole thing. It was a lot of fun. It's great. It's hard to be a successor to a game like StarCraft, but I do believe they did a pretty good job with it. What happened to the game you bought? I bought the intellectual property for Legends of Valor, and I just haven't had time to set up the game development company. I was planning on actually getting it started this year in the summertime, but then my brother decided to retire, as did my dad, and we're starting a biotech company together. So the slot of time that I had for game development, unfortunately, I've had to spend that a little differently. That said, it's still there, and I do have conversations about every 2 weeks about it with various people. And there's actually a game development university program in France. My CTO Roman, he used to be in game development. In fact, he created Pokemon Go before Pokemon Go existed. It was his PhD dissertation. He's affiliated with a French research group, and we're going to do something kind of like Crypto Kitties, and we're calling it Crypto Bison because my ranch in Wyoming has bison. So I'll do something there, and I still have intentions I beautiful plans for all the stuff for the game company. So Legends of Valor is kind of like an RPG, and we're going to do it like Skyrim, so like an Elder Scrolls game. And there's a whole plot. I have over 86 pages of game design collateral. So I drew stuff and I wrote out the plot and I have the NPCs. And so I have a really good idea of what I want to do there. And I think it's a beautiful spiritual successor to the original game, Legends of Valor, but modernized in the ways you would expect. And I even talked with a guy who used to work with Gary Gygax, and he gave some great advice as well. The second thing I'd like to do is resurrect the Goldbox engine, which was a game engine for original Dungeons and Dragons games, not even second edition like Baldur's Gate, but actually first edition. And it ran in the Forgotten Realms. I'd like to update that, modernize it, make it retro, put in some really cool mechanics with it, and then put it into the Pathfinder game system and embed it in the Pathfinder game world because the licensing there is significantly easier. And the third thing I'd like to do in that game company is actually start licensing IP in the Warhammer 40K universe and run a series of games there. Dawn of War was really well done, and I think there's a great market for RTSs in Warhammer, and there's a great marketplace for things like Eisenhorn, but done even at a grander scale. And Games Workshop seems to be quite amenable to a pretty permissive license if you don't go with the Rabute Gilliman standard world stuff. So all of that, of course, with gamification and microtransactions and tokenomics and so forth. So anything we would do, we would try to connect it to the Cardano blockchain and issue that. But that's a separate company. And also experimental game mechanics. One of the reasons why we're talking to this French university is that I'd like to explore things like hypergeometry. Like there's a great game called Hyperbolica, which does that. I'd highly recommend you guys look at it. AI-driven game development. For example, Event Zero, where you can actually interface with a terminal and talk to an intelligent agent, and it can reply real time to your dialogue. That is some great stuff. And it'd be really cool to see what we can use GPT-3 for that. And other cool game design concepts like variability of time, variability of gravity, different atmospheric conditions. So physics emulation, but then it's connected to a magic system or connected to other such things. So those experimental mechanics, it would be nice to have some game R&D that's done. It's not necessarily connected to a particular game, but it becomes a capability that can then be embedded into either the RTS portfolio or, let's say, the Warhammer 40K portfolio. So I have it all there. And I have money set aside for it, depending on how much Biden takes from me. But we'll get around to it at some point. I'm also doing a lot in aquaponics. I just had a great conversation with the largest aquaponics guy in Puerto Rico, and I'll be flying to Puerto Rico likely in June to have a conversation and tour his whole facility. And I might end up building a 100,000 square foot aquaponics facility in Wyoming, depending upon market conditions, and have tilapia and all this other stuff, and build a power plant next to it and so forth. So yeah, I do a lot of that stuff on the side in addition to all the Cardano stuff. Armenian genocide recognition. Yeah, this is an interesting one. The United States of America, we did horrible things in our history. Nation states do. There's no notion of a nation state that's bloodless if it's old, or if you have more than 10 years of history, you probably did something to somebody. During the 19th century, there were massacres of Native Americans. The indigenous people died of smallpox, and the ones who didn't die, frontier settlers came in and enslaved, imprisoned. They did horrible, horrible things. Great nations have the capacity to admit that they have a past, and that past was nuanced. There were glorious, amazing things, and there's horrors inside your past. Everybody who is German must live with the fact that the Nazi regime existed. Everybody who's Russian must live with the fact that Stalin existed. Everybody who's American must live with the fact that we had slavery and that we massacred the indigenous populations. These are things that happened. We're mature enough as a society to accept that. And I will point out that no one alive today in America participated in those things. They're all dead. So when we look at the Armenian genocide, it occurred very, very early in the 20th century. There is no one in Turkey alive today responsible for that. So there's no notion of blame here. It's not about blaming. It's not about saying, oh, well, Bob is responsible and should go to jail or something. They're all dead. They're all gone. It's more about saying, what can we as a society learn from the people who came before us? Not just the good things, but we also must explore the bad things and understand why that darkness came and why human beings were capable of those things. If you're unwilling to do that, your society will inevitably return to that behavior because you don't build in the safeguards, the checks and balances, the social constructs that inhibit you from going into those particular things. And this is a great example of it. And this particular genocide was actually one that Hitler himself referenced as a reason why they would get away with the final solution. And it's a blind spot in the world for geopolitical reasons. And so I'm incredibly glad that there's more discussion about this, but I don't think in isolation it makes any sense, or else it's just beating up on people for no sense. It has to be put into a broader context. The Rwandan genocide, the genocide of the indigenous people, the Holocaust, the Holodomor, the Cambodian genocide, the current genocide that's going on in Western China with the Uyghurs. These are all interconnected, and they're interconnected to the same thought process where one group of people decide, arbitrarily or otherwise, that they have the right to harm another group of people for the only crime of belonging to that particular group. That dehumanization, that lack of empathy, that lack of sympathy, it's a human pattern. And there's no vaccine against this where one group of people will never do that. You may think, oh, I'm Norwegian, so we'll never do that. Or I'm Italian, we'll never do that. Or I'm from this country, Swiss, and we'll never do that. We all have the potential capacity as humans to succumb to this thought pattern and process, either in the indirect way of racism and bigotry or the direct way of force or genocide. It's just how far on the spectrum do you go? The point of recognition of these things is the first step in finding a social construct that prevents us from going down that particular road. And I'm very skeptical of any country that refuses to admit its past or embrace its past. And if they try to create consequences for that, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the souls of the leadership of that nation. And they need to do some fact finding and internal truths. Thoughts on GameStop? Uh, it's a classic example of speculative surges. You see this a lot in the cryptocurrency space. It's not so common in the security space. And because of these new platforms, the tools to enable it are occurring. And the hedge fund people and the securities people, oh God, what do we do? So we've been dealing with this stuff for 10 years in cryptocurrencies. It happens all the time. You'll see some small cap or near dead coin like Doge. It'll just surge up and everybody go crazy about it for a little while. And then it comes collapsing down. But it generally doesn't happen with real companies and that are registered with the SEC and have an actual product and legacy. And it happened with GameStop, which caused a lot of people to get very concerned. I am a libertarian by heart, and I don't really mind when people make financial decisions with their own money, as long as they're doing so without an information asymmetry. Where it really pisses me off is when one side of the market knows something the other side doesn't know, and they're allowed to trade on that information, and they're directly connected to the asset. For example, let's say you work at a pharmaceutical company and you know that the FDA is just about to give you approval. So you go and call your brother and say, hey, Bill, they're going to give us FDA approval, buy the shares. Or conversely, you're actually going to get rejected by the FDA. So you say, hell yeah, Bill, short all the shares. So you sell your own shares. It's called insider trading. I think it's wrong. But this is not a case of insider trading with GameStop. It's a speculative surge. It's a different animal altogether. And what will end up happening is go way up and it'll go down. If the company can do a season equity offering or, find some way to profit from the speculative surge, then perhaps you can use it to capitalize itself to change its business model and justify its newfound valuation. So sometimes just the mere attention can change the reality enough to allow people to do new and interesting things. But oftentimes it's just a blip and it goes down. But I don't think in this case, with a regulated financial product like GameStop, where there are no asymmetries, that a regulator needs to get involved. It's counterproductive. And I don't understand what they're going to accomplish with it. Federico Sala, he says, hello from Italy, sir. Any news about Hydra and NFT? Ciao, Federico. Hydra, we should have an update. If not the end of this month, then the next Cardano 360 episode. But I'll have the Hydra team do something. They've been building prototypes now for about a month and a half. And we have a new Hydra paper coming out in May. I believe. That's our current schedule. I think they're submitting it to CCS. I'll have to see the conference train for it. So a lot of progress there. Things are looking good. We've been working on NFT marketplaces. We've done a lot of really cool pioneering work with NFTs. We've had so many people reach out to us to discuss NFTs and the possibility, from Wolfram to a lot of celebrities. So I'll have some. I'll have some more for you in a bit, but we should be able to bring NFTs sooner than you think. And but I'm not going to jump that announcement. Do you ever miss your time working at Ethereum? No, absolutely not. I was only there for 6 years, 6 months, and it was miserable. The 6 months, it was so stressful. There was a business side, a tech side, and I was in the middle, and shit rolls downhill, and everything rolled down on me. And then after that, got kicked out. Lots of books got wrote about how horrible of a human being I am and all the bad personality characteristics I have. Apparently, I'm the worst person alive, but somehow I was able to start a company with 300 people and build Cardano. I must be total accident. It must just fall into my lap. Um, there's just some stuff there that I've moved on from, but they don't seem to have the capacity to do so. And I didn't really gain a lot. In fact, if I get a do-over, I never would have joined the Ethereum project. I would have gone and done something else, and my life would be a lot easier in this space. Uh, so I know I don't miss my time one bit. There's also this, I don't know, like Ethereum arrogance. We interview a lot of people in the space. We notice if people are like hardcore in the Ethereum space when they interview for our company or we're trying to do a project or something with them. There's this attitude like, why are you? How do you have the audacity to talk to me? You know, I'm so special. Just look at Mike Novogratz. You know, like, you will talk to me on Monday. Just so much of that from that side of the space, as if their shit doesn't stink. Meanwhile, there's so many problems there and very little intellectual honesty about the practicality of resolving those problems. I mean, sure, we've had some delays in our roadmap timelines. I'll be the first to admit that. And I'm the first to blame for that. I was overly optimistic on certain things, but they weren't scientific delays. It wasn't like we were saying this is solvable and it's going to be solved by this date. And there wasn't even an approach. Guys, we had the Ouroboros Genesis paper published and peer reviewed in 2018. A lot of the Plutus stuff, 1.0 language, had we had faster engineering, we could have brought it to market in 2019. It's just the engineering was the bottleneck, and it was very difficult in practice to implement this stuff. The Ethereum side of the world, they're saying, oh, everything's going to be great. Optimistic rollups and plasma states. We're saying this stuff without a paper, without peer review, without a working prototype, and then giving prognostications of a timeline and utility and solving all the problems. So to institutionalize that for a whole ecosystem and do that year after year after year after year without improvement, it just doesn't feel right with me. So I don't fit into that mold and into that culture. We work much better with the rigorous coins like the Harmony ones or the Algorands or the Avalanches. Even the Tezos, is the community doesn't like me very much because I criticize Arthur Brightman, but I at least can read their stuff and understand it. And Camel's a great language, and there are great companies in that ecosystem like Nomadic Labs and so forth. So that makes sense to me, but I don't understand the Ethereum world, and I never will. And I also don't understand the ICO mania. I don't understand the high gas fees, all of this stuff, the unrealistic valuations, the high DeFi prices, all these things. It doesn't make sense to me. Do you still own ETH? I've never owned any ETH. The first time I got any Ether in my entire life was after I sold those tweets. So I have a little bit of Ether from those, but That's the first time I ever got an Ether. I never got my pre-mine. It was 293,000 Ether, and I gave it away. I didn't receive it. Charles, what do you do when you have to make a difficult decision? So first off, it depends on the context of the difficult decision. Is it personal? Is it economic? Is it spiritual? I mean, where does it sit in that? And then there's different tool bags that you have to make that decision. So if it's business related, commercial, economic, there you're saying, okay, first off, is this existential or not? There's a flow chart there. So existential means I screwed up. Will the company go out of business, or will it cause so much damage and harm that it's hard to come back from? If it's existential, then you say, okay, what do I need to know to even approach this problem? What are similar types of problems? What are similar types of decisions? Have I made these types of decisions in the past? Has anybody made these types of decisions in the past? What are the inputs? And what tools do I have to heuristically examine those inputs? And am I making this with a total view? Am I making this with an incomplete view? Also, what is my time horizon? Do I have to make the decision now? Can I bat it off a little bit? And is this a collective decision or is this not a collective decision? If it's non-existential and there's this value at risk, and you say, can I afford to lose this money? If I can, I don't really lose too much sweat if we get it wrong. It's like lending money to people. People often ask, do you lend money to family? I say, I'll only do that if I can lose the money and not regret it. So they come and say, I need a loan. I say, okay, is it the case that I could just throw this money in the storm drain and I would go about my life no problem at all? If that's the case, lend money to people. If that's not, never lend money to family, because it really screws up your relationship otherwise. Okay, so non-existentials there. So that's commercial. And that's an art. There's actually a cool problem solving course on Coursera that kind of talks about these things. You can build decision trees, and there's all these tools and techniques to think around and handle these things and quantify. And when you think about risk, you have high risk, high certainty, low risk, high certainty, low certainty, high risk, and low risk, low certainty, these types of things. And then the other part of the three-dimensional spectrum is seriousness. So high risk, high certainty, and existential seriousness versus non-existential. So, all risk lives in these things. Then when you look at personal decisions, that's really about your value system that you have. Are you virtue ethics? Are you guided by religion and a deontological notion? Are you kind of like one of those frou-frou spiritual consequentialists and everything's the same? But you can't make difficult decisions in life unless you have the North Star of a value system to get you through difficult decisions in life. So if you're having trouble making interpersonal decisions, that means that you're having trouble with your value system, because a value system comes within it a machine work framework to evaluate things and make hard choices. Stay with the wife, leave the wife. What to do with the kids, what to do with this, what to do with parents, and so forth. Everybody has a family, even orphans, they find one. And everybody has family members, friends, and other people who do things that sometimes are just crazy and stupid and counterproductive. And you just wonder, wow. People in my social circles have had drug addictions and other such things. And you just think, why are you so self destructive? In some cases, you have cut people out of your life. And these are difficult in that make you sad to make the decision, but they haven't been particularly hard in that I had to sit down and stress for weeks and weeks and weeks and agonize, because I have a value system that allows me to kind of think about the whole thing. And I have red lines in life. And I say, okay, if you cross that red line, it's over. As nice as it could be, you've crossed a red line. We can't come back from that. So it is what it is. And so, that's how you make a difficult decision. So the better job you do at building your value system and your ability to analyze the world around you. In fact, that's what ethics used to be. It was how to decide how to live life instead of is something right or wrong. it's more of a practical framework, the better job you'll do navigating things. Then on the spiritual side, that's really a situation of how do you reconcile with death? We all are going to die. Every single one of the 3,056 people listening to this podcast is going to die at some point. Maybe tomorrow, maybe 100 years from now. Okay, but we all die. Life is finite. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And your spiritual framework is how you deal with that inevitability. Ernest Becker wrote a great book called The Denial of Death, and it talked around how human beings deal with this. What we tend to do is construct immortality cults. So we invent some notion that allows us to cognitively reconcile that we are finite and we will cease to exist at some point. So that could be that you go to some magic afterlife. That can be that you reincarnate and the cycle begins again. That can be that some simulacrum of you spiritually will embed itself into the earth spirit and everybody's there. Whatever that structure might be, or it could be rationalism where you mentally accept that you're going to die. You go through a series of exercises, almost like a Bushido-like exercise, and you come out the other side accepting that reality, and you're at peace and comfortable with the finiteness of life. Spiritual decisions are about the reconciliation of that, because if the immortality cult interferes with the way you're living your life, what you're doing is the life today is interfering with the life of tomorrow, either in a finite sense or an eternal sense. And then that creates a schism in people. So imagine if you have a value system that says being gay is bad and you're gay. That's an example of an internal conflict. So your value system is telling you, if you do this, it's going to put you in eternal damnation, but then that's what you want to do with your life. It's like built in. Okay. So how do you reconcile that? How do you separate that? What often happens, and I'd argue it's the right thing to do, is change the value system, because you can't change the other one. Everybody who tries lives a pretty miserable life. So that's the other side of it, is creating a connection to a value system, a spiritual system that allows you to reconcile with the finiteness of life. And therein lies perhaps the most unexamined part. We usually pick our careers, and nobody complains about that. We pick our families in some cases, like we pick who to marry and who to date, these things. We usually inherit our spiritual system. So if you're Muslim, it's probably because your parents are Muslim. If you're Christian, it's probably because your parents are Christian. Not always. People convert and people change, especially when they do that second thing. You may marry and convert to Judaism. Ivanka Trump did that. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Usually you inherit a big chunk of your spirituality from those who came before you. So given that that's inherited and deeply ingrained into your social networks, to change your value system so that it can reconcile with how you desire to live the rest of your life can be catastrophic. Some people get excommunicated from their families. Happens all the time, like Mormon extremists in Utah or something, or Amish or something. If you change your system, you can no longer even be a member of your society. And that's probably the most difficult decision that anybody can make, a life of consensus or a life of happiness. But ultimately, I'd argue the life of happiness is superior. Good question. Yeah, this is the Larry David. I converted to Judaism so I can make Jewish jokes. Remember, Jews never die. They just slowly depreciate and then gradually get written off. Hi, Charles. Have you looked into moving Puerto Rico for the 0% capital gains tax exemption offered to Americans under Act 60? I'm making the move from Denver in June and becoming a blockchain dev. I've met a lot of people who've done that. Brock Pierce has done it. Michael Turpin's done it. It's a common little tax evasion scam in the cryptocurrency space. It works quite well for people who figure it out. You have to stay in Puerto Rico for for half the year, and they measure that very closely. And a lot of stuff you have to do to get the exemption, and it's difficult. But for the people who have made it work, they've saved a lot on taxes. Here's what I do: I just make more money. I love Colorado. I love Wyoming, rough and rugged Wyoming, and warm and sunny Colorado. And this is where I'm going to be, and this is where I'm going to die. It's my home. So if tax rates go up, I'll just make more money to offset it, and I'll have the difference. It's a little different than California. There are a lot of people who are born in California, leaving California. If it was just a cost of living thing, you can always find a way to justify it. It's now a liberties and safety thing. The streets are filled with crime and homeless, and infrastructure is falling apart. People get robbed all the time. A friend lived in San Francisco. His car's been broken into 19 times in 2 years. 19 times in 2 years. He reported it every single time to the police. They didn't do anything about it. In one case, he had a video of it because he had a dash cam and all these other things, has the guy's face and everything. They don't care. They won't do anything at all about it. So he left. He's now in Austin. That's a little different. Colorado, we don't have that problem yet, although we're moving in that direction because the Californians are coming. But Wyoming, you get shot. I like Wyoming. Do you think Andreas Antonopoulos will write a Breaking Cardano book? Well, we asked him to write a Mastering Cardano. I'd pay the guy money too. We're probably going to have Jim Caldwell do that at University of Wyoming in the blockchain tech lab that we have there. I'm actually having dinner with president of University of Wyoming here in a little bit, Ed Seidel, and it's going to be one of many topics we talk about. I love that university. It's very easy to go to and talk to. Oh, this is an interesting one. Hi, Charles. I'm driving, but happy to listen to you live. Well, thank you, Shift for Change. Are you looking into 3D printed homes? I actually have had these discussions before with 3D fabricators, not only homes, but also mechanization. So we talk a lot with many African agricultural ministries, and one of their biggest problems is it's not hard to get mechanization there. Like I can buy a Massey Ferguson or a John Deere tractor and ship it to Ethiopia or Mozambique or somewhere. But then it's the supply chain and the maintenance that's a brutal. Like how you fix that? How you train people to fix that? Do you have to ship the tractor to Italy or something to get it taken care of? So that's no good. So there's been a lot of discussion of local fabrication where you have 3D printers that can actually build the tractor and you can hand assemble it modules. And then you can use biofuels to power it. And if something breaks, there's a process to restore it. It's closely related to 3D fabrication of homes, especially when you start talking about these complex structures. That said, it's not something I'm doing at the moment, but I've had these conversations, and there's some people who just really study those conversations. They think about them, and it'd be super cool in my 40s to collaborate with them. Please coin burn. So we have our first member of the paint chip brigade today. Coin burn. So whose coins am I going to burn? You tell me that. Yours? I'll give you a burn address. There you go. Do you play Minecraft, Charles Hoskinson? Not only I play Minecraft, I was an alpha tester way back in the day when you could message Notch before you got big and rich. You find a bug, you email them, they email you back. It was fun. Minecraft is a great game. I even downloaded some of those mods. I remember version 1.2.5. I had a gun mod where you had a flintlock gun. You had to kill the creepers to collect gunpowder, and then you could make bullets and shoot people. It was a great game. And flying structures, you could do that as well. Thoughts on Wyoming recognizing DAO as LLC? I actually think a DAO combined with a Cayman Star Trust is a phenomenal model, and it's something we are looking into for the DCF. And I think we can get there. Do you meditate? Yes, I do. Actually, I have something on me. Let me show you guys. So I was wearing this on one of my AMAs or a message, and this is an Apollo neural sport. Right. Let me make sure I have the title right. Apollo Neural Science, maybe. I'm just going to get the website here. Yeah, Apollo Neuro. There we go. And one of the people from the company actually emailed me and said they're Cardano fans. So this is a device that helps with something called heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is just one of those curious things, and I won't get into it, but there's a lot of great science about it, and it helps you with relaxation. It can help you go to sleep. It can help you live longer and be calmer. And how it works is you put it on your wrist, you push a button, and it runs for 30 minutes, and there you go. And you can use it every day if you want to. There's really no side effects. And actually, it does work. There's a ton of science behind it. And I think Apollo makes a great product, and I carry it in my pocket with me. And I use it every day. So I meditate. The Calm app is great. Emotive, not emotive, but Muse. The Muse 2 is a headset that I tend to use. And I'm actually looking at a lot of great technology in the BCI space. But heart rate variability is another cool thing to do that. There's a even bigger device called the Heart Math that does things. And that's interesting too. But the Apollo is pretty cool to buy because it's just so damn easy to use. Headspace is another great app. That's true. There's some great apps out there. Will Atala Prism include capabilities biometrics to secure private keys? You don't want to use biometrics to secure private keys because everything you do leaves biometrics behind. This right here is the biometric for fingerprints. I did that. Now you guys have my fingerprint. Okay. Hackers are very clever, and the same for iris scans and face scans and things like that. So biometrics are not secure as a mechanism for encryption or a mechanism for secrecy. It's the username, and you combine that with something else, either something you have like a YubiKey or a PIN code generator like Google Authenticator or CAC card or whatever, or you combine it with something you know like a PIN code. And generally there's all kinds of schemes that you can come up with where you can make that reasonably secure for most applications. For the secrecy of a private key, shielding is the standard. We use a password to shield that's hardened. And I like the idea of a password with some notion of biometrics, with some PIN code. There's ways to make that secure. But ultimately, the gold standard is hardware enforced security, so a YubiKey or something like that. There's even a biometric scanner. There was a cell phone that LG made that would scan the vasculature of your hand, and it would actually create a unique identification from your hand. So you'd hold your hand up to the screen, and it would scan the veins, and it would know it would create a unique fingerprint from that. YubiKey for daedalus spending passwords. It's a high priority for me, a hard one for security, and I would love to have that where it actually refreshes and it re-encrypts or something like that. So we've had some discussions. You can use the static password option and a YubiKey for the long press, and you can reconfigure it to do that. So I think that's a good thing to do. Is a hardware wallet necessary? If you're serious about crypto at some point in the value chain, you should get a hardware wallet. They're not expensive and they massively improve the overall security. And they're not the only component, but adopting that alone enormously reduces your risk of theft. So highly, highly recommend it. Charles, why are we told that people like George Washington need to be recognized for the good things he did and ignore the bad? I don't think I say that or any reasonable person says that. He was a nuanced person. And you talk about the nuances. But the problem is when we have this movement of statue burners, what they do is they say because he did something bad, we need to remove everything named after him, change all the names of the states, never mention him again, and view him as some sort of compromised evil person. Washington was a great man. And he was a great man because there were moments in history where he could have made a decision to benefit himself, and he passed on that. And as a consequence, he allowed a great nation to exist. Now, yes, he did some bad things. He was inadvertently responsible for part of the French and Indian War. Mount Vernon wasn't exactly a paradise. There were certain things in his life which were not so good. But when you actually look at the totality of all of it, he had a choice to become the king of this country or its first president. And because he made the choice to become its first president, it allowed us to exist in the way we are today, for better or for worse. If he became a king, we would have just had one monarchy after another monarchy, and a lot of great evils would have been done, and the American experiment would have never happened the way it happened. And I would argue we'd be a much worse nation than we are today. So, yeah, by all means, read Ron Chernow's book on Washington. There's dozens of great books that cover all the nuances and talk about all the things and speculate. Did he have an affair with Sally Fairfax or not? And what was his real relationship with his brother Lawrence? And how did Lawrence dying of tuberculosis alter and change him? And the death of his children and his inability to have his own children, et cetera, et cetera. His shame of not learning French and these things. And they're very worthwhile to study. The same for Ulysses S. Grant, and the same for many of the other icons of Americana. Lincoln wasn't a saint either. Mother died of milk sick in 1818. Any updates on Yella and formal verification? Yeah, we'll get into a monthly update train with RV on that. The Alpha Frontier program's churning away, and there's about a 6-month book of work on Yella for the moment, and we'll just keep adding to it. Uh-huh. Got a K80 shotgun in that safe, don't you? I'd be a Benelli man if I had a shotgun. An M4. Come on. That's the self-defense shotgun. You rotate. Birdshot, buckshot, slug. Big fan, Charles. Well, Miss McCain, I'm a big fan too. Thank you so much for joining the Cardano ecosystem. What are your opinions on anarchism? You should watch the podcast with Lex Friedman and Michael Malice. He probably represents that philosophy better than anybody else. Survival of the fittest and strongest is not exactly the ideal governance structure. Why is Wolfram better for Cardano than Chainlink? Because Wolfram is the Arrakis of the Oracle world. He who controls the spice controls the universe. And what Stephen has done is he controls the data. So he who controls the data controls the universe. They also have a beautiful language called Wolfram that makes all that data computable. Yeah. I think you guys would like the Dune reference. What's the oldest thing you own? I have a lot of artifacts, but the oldest thing that I own is a mosasaur jaw. It's tens of millions of years old. What book would you highly suggest to read? Why don't we start from first principles, JV? Start with Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book. And good old Nick says, tell us about your farm. Well, Nick, you're just going to have to come out and see it. It's Nick Nafak. He's one of the guys that works on commercial and strategy with IO Global and one of the brightest guys I've ever met. I love reading his messages, and he has some cool people. And JP says, thank you for all your hard work. Well, JP, thank you for being a fan. Mm-hmm. Do. Are you more excited for Diablo 2 Resurrected or Diablo 4? Diablo 2 Resurrected because it's a real game. Blizzard hasn't made a real game in a long time, but I'm going to bring the old band back together. All the people I was friends with when I was 12 years old, 15 years old, and we're gonna play Diablo 2. I got everything set up. I got an HP Omen that I retrofitted. I got the other supercomputer. We're ready to go. And I'll be the druid. Brother's gonna be the necromancer. Got a friend who's gonna be the paladin. Another friend who's gonna be the barbarian. That's a party right there, yo. With my infinite free time. How are your thoughts on the COVID agenda, New World Order, all this stuff? First, I'm not a believer in the New World Order. I don't think governments are that competent to manage things at that level with that degree of secrecy. That said, I am a firm believer that politicians subscribe to the philosophy of let no crisis go to waste. Uh, Personally, from the preponderance of all the evidence, I believe that COVID is likely a pathogen that was archived at a lab in Wuhan, and one of the lab techs got infected from it, probably with a mild infection due to a lack of poor safety standards, because that lab was notorious for it. And he went for something to eat at the wet market and spread it to people there. Which is why the initial Chinese response was so secretive and closed, and it was an attempt to cover something up. And the WHO was the little lapdog of China, and they basically buried it under a rug. Then it got out of hand, it spread quickly, and governments were terrified of Spanish flu style pandemic. There's 17 years of history in China with coronavirus since the original coronavirus epidemic. And there had been a huge amount of research, gain and function research, and other things that were done in those circles. That was one of the few places in the world to study a disease like that. It's inconceivable to me that this was just a random occurrence, but it is what it is. Whether it was escaped from a lab or it is a zoonotic infection, the end result is the same. It spread like wildfire throughout the world. And for a certain group of people, the mortality rate is 1 to 5%. And for most of us, it's not. And as a consequence, because that certain group was large enough, millions of people have died. It's a real disease, and it really does a lot of harm to certain people. As many of you know, my brother's a physician, and he had to treat this firsthand in Gillette, Wyoming. And if you look at x-rays of people who contracted coronavirus from the initial infection to where they're at months later, the lungs still look the same, like a bomb went off in them. It was horrible for a lot of people. Many people listening know someone who's died or been seriously impacted as a consequence of COVID, and long COVID is a thing. And it's like the Gulf War syndrome of my generation. Now, what governments have done is, despite the fact that today, now more than a year into this, we have great treatments. We understand things like the use of ivermectin and vitamin D can certainly be beneficial. There's monoclonal antibodies. There are vaccines that are more than 90% effective and easy to distribute. In the United States, 33% of the population is vaccinated. They're pretending as if this is still November of 2019 and this is an unknown pathogen and it's novel and it could be as damaging as 10% of the population. And what they're doing is they're using that excuse to control people and make people afraid. I went to the office today. An older person walked by me. I'm vaccinated. That older person's vaccinated. He's wearing a mask. I'm walking to the office outside, and he purposely moves away from me as if I'm an infectious vector to harm him. If you're vaccinated, your chance of death is 1 in 1 million. That's with all the data we have. 77.6 million Americans, about 71 deaths post-vaccination. That's from the CDC. And the data is holding with all of this. There are breakthrough cases. There was 5,800 breakthrough cases out of the 77 million that were vaccinated, which is extraordinary. It's a very low amount, and very few people get hospitalized or die. And usually there's something more to the story, like they have cancer and they've gotten it, or serious comorbidity like heart disease and other things, and they die with COVID, but it wasn't the primary cause of death. But the CDC records that nonetheless. And yes, the vaccines are holding strong against the variants. Israel's been exposed to South Africa variants, been exposed to the UK variant. And from the data sets we have there, they're still protective. Not perfectly protective. You might get a mild illness. But let's be clear here. If everybody was vaccinated in the world at the beginning of this pandemic, there would be no pandemic. Just that simple. Here's my problem with policy. Colorado, Wyoming. Colorado, worst thing in the world. Restaurants 50% capacity. I was at Bojo's Pizza here in Longmont. I walk on in and the restaurant's damn near empty. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't have too many people because capacity. And I say, okay, well, when's the next table going to be available? About 20 minutes. And I say, okay. And I go to sit in the corner, the empty corner. There's no one there. Oh, you can't wait outside. You have to wait outside in the wind and the snow. And I'm vaccinated. That's not sensible policy. Then you go up to Cheyenne, Wyoming, not too far away. And the waitresses and waiters aren't wearing masks. Everybody's just hanging out, no social distancing. I'm sorry, you can't have a situation where there's freedom of movement between a quarantine zone and a non-quarantine zone and expect the quarantine zone to be effective. It doesn't work. Either you have a total lockdown like an island does, like New Zealand or Taiwan, or you don't. If you can't achieve that, you need different policy. And what they're basically saying is everybody needs to be tested. Everybody's freedom of movement needs to be restricted. We need to track everybody. Everybody needs to be vaccinated, but the vaccines don't matter. And we'll never get out of it. Because here's the thing. India, Brazil, the developing world, they will not get vaccinated at a high enough level this year or next year. Variants occur. Eventually they become strains. Eventually they escape the vaccines. One person started this global pandemic. Either a lab tech or a farmer with a zoonotic infection, doesn't really matter. One person did it. And it spread. One person with a mutant strain that escapes the vaccines can restart the whole thing. And if that means the clock is reset and we have to wait another year for vaccines, another year to build 1 billion vaccines and vaccinate everybody, that means this never ends, ever. It's here forever. We're stuck with it. And we're under a permanent lockdown where our freedom of movements are restricted. Vaccine passports will create a two-class citizenship. And you're basically told lie after lie after lie after lie after lie by your government. And then people are brainwashed into supporting it. They say, how dare you fight that? You're not a doctor. And then when a doctor speaks up, well, you're not a real doctor. Only the doctors who work for the government are real doctors. All other physicians don't know what they're talking about if they oppose the orthodoxy. And then you ask for reasonable goalposts. You say, okay, well, what's the vaccination rate before we get back to normal? Can't tell you. Okay. So we don't have goalposts and we're under this. And then I think it's going to create a political revolution at some point. People get so tired of it, they'll say, that's it. We're done. Either they'll just stop complying altogether, or they'll vote until they get a set of politicians that remove these lockdowns. Because the alternative is medical totalitarianism. That's where we're currently at and under. And the really sad thing is that a sensible approach could be adopted to solve this. These vaccines can be updated rapidly. That's the miracle of mRNA and these other platforms. And with good genomic surveillance, good molecular biology, good R&D, every year we can have a better vaccine than the one before. And every year they get more and more effective, and there's less and less variations of the disease that are going to be problematic for us. The mainstream people, if they contract coronavirus, now I say on average, it's not a problem for them. There are certain groups that is, and certain people in the mainstream that it is, and you can always find an example of a person who has a bad outcome. Yes, there is the 19-year-old girl who died from it. But on average, the vast majority of people who contract coronavirus in the mainstream are okay. The people who wouldn't be, make sure you have a 90% vaccination rate there. Then you reopen society. Because the other group of people, it's if they have free access to a vaccine, it's a personal decision they make. And the people who are vaccinated in the at-risk group, if they get exposed, it's a 1 in a million chance for them to die. I'm sorry, it's not a serious concern anymore for them. They don't have to behave like society's bad. And over time, you get a higher and higher natural immunity because you combine the COVID vaccine with the influenza vaccine, and we get back to work. And like every other pandemic, the Spanish flu and the others, it'll burn out over time. The other thing is every developed government should mandate with the vaccine companies a buy one, get one free program, saying we will only purchase a vaccine if you donate a vaccine to the developing world. If you just look at the European Union, Canada, and the United States, that would be about 3 billion doses of free vaccines for the developing world, which is enough to cover India and the entire continent of Africa. Why? It's avarice otherwise. Why not do it? So there's just not the political will to solve it. There's a lot of incompetence. I'm sorry, you can't tell me you're trusting science when a person alone on a beach at 6:00 in the afternoon gets a ticket for sitting alone on the beach, but then that same person can walk down the beach to a resort in Hawaii and go into a densely packed pool with lots of tourists closely looking at each other, coughing in each other, talking to each other, but that's a permitted activity. You can't do this to people. You can't have these inconsistencies. You can't have the lies. You can't say vitamin D does nothing. I would argue that a vitamin D mandate would save more lives than a mask mandate with the evidence we have available. I'll take that bet 10 times out of 10 times, and I'll probably be right with it. But no, we don't care about it. Not only do we have to wear it, double mask, triple mask, quadruple mask. And does anybody know how to wear them correctly? They reuse them all the time. It's not fitted to their faces. What about facial hair? There's a reason why when you go through MOP training in the military, you have to shave, okay, because you need a proper seal with a mask if you expect them to work properly. I'm sorry, there's just no truth and honesty to what's happening right now and how things are working, from the inconsistencies of quarantine zones to arbitrary policies to the fact that you're trying to tell people to get vaccinated, but you provide them no incentive for it, the intellectual dishonesty to the media of sensationalizing everything. Fear porn, fear porn, fear porn, fear porn, fear porn, fear porn. Again and again and again and again and again. Vaccines work. Then why the hell are you telling us about blood clots? 1 in a million for blood clots. 1 in a million. But let's make that the story so less people get vaccinated. What are you doing? Honestly, it's like, what do you want? I don't get it. I don't understand it. What's the agenda? It's just insanity. It's all madness, absolute madness. And I'm just done with it. I'm so frustrated. I'm worn out. It's one of the reasons I bought the damn ranch in Wyoming. I'm just getting reticent to travel or to interact, and I'm just tired of the double speak. I'm tired of the just madness of all this, the harm it's done to people. There is a cost to making people fear each other. We are humans. We need physical contact. We touch each other. This is part of the human experience. Every culture, every tribe, every religious ritual involves human touch at some point in the fashion. A hug, a kiss, something. And when you create a situation where we have to view each other as threats to each other's existence, vectors of disease, and we're indoctrinating children this way in school who really don't suffer ill consequences to this, despite all the propaganda that keeps being pushed out. You are creating a society that is messed up in the head. It's broken. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit back together. And it becomes a lot easier to control people and harm people. So I think that there isn't some guiding hand about it, but I do think that there's certain groups of politicians that are definitely taking advantage of this for social change in a direction that they want to go. And they have not once been honest with us in any sense of the word. This is a public health issue. It's not a medical problem. It's a public health issue. You solve that with a different toolbox than you solve a medical issue with a person with cancer or a patient with tuberculosis or something like that. You cease being a doctor thing. It's an epidemiological thing. It's an economic thing. It's a social thing. Public health deals with acceptable risk. We accept the risk of influenza every year as a society since I was born, and we never took any of these measures for it. Somehow that's acceptable. COVID apparently is not. No one has the courage to tell us where that spectrum is and at what point do we cross the threshold from one to the other. And this is not exactly the first pandemic mankind has dealt with. Read history. Look at the Black Death. Look at what that did. Look at how many people died in 1348. Look at how horrific a third of the population, sometimes half or more of the population of a city. Look at smallpox. Some people believe 9 out of 10 indigenous members of the United States died from smallpox over a 200-year period. A reduction from 40 to 60 million Native Americans to 4 to 6 million. That's how bad that was. Don't tell me that something that for most of us is 0.3%, untreated, no vaccine, that is morally equivalent and should require a total retooling of all society. And then I read articles on Bloomberg saying this is the new normal. I will speak out and fight against this every day until I'm deplatformed and silenced and exiled. And then I'll go to my ranch in Wyoming and be a grumpy old man. But I think you should too. And if enough of us do it, then it doesn't become the new normal and we get back to normal. And it's okay. Will people die? Yes. That's the nature of life. And that's the nature of society. And you accept that. You get in your battery-powered car. You just murdered somebody. Because where do the raw materials for that battery in your battery-powered car come from? And do you think that there's not some slave labor somewhere in that supply chain? Some child that doesn't actually get to be a child because he's working at 11 years old in a mine somewhere in Africa or in in Asia? Oh my God, you should look into that before you judge. Think about it. There are so many things, from the textiles on your shirt, the dye that goes into that. How much cancer do you think the textile business has brought to the poorest people in the world as you wear your colorful shirt, your colorful dress? Don't fucking lecture me about me not caring and having empathy and being self-centered and selfish. I want to live in a society where we have empathy for each other and care about each other, hug each other, love each other. I don't want to live in a society where I have to cover myself in PPE every fucking day and old people stay away from me, even though I'm vaccinated. I don't want to live in a society where a medical dictatorship tells me for my own good arbitrary things that make no sense at all and don't pass any standard of science. And that's the society I'm in today. I accepted it until vaccines came. Now they're here. Now a third of my country is vaccinated. And yet no one has the courage to step and say, we've vaccinated enough and we're in a position where we're okay. Herd immunity will never come because strains and variants will come from the developing world every year. So there is no goalpost of 70% or 80%. Look at Australia. They're already pre-chewing it. They said even after we vaccinate 70% of the population, we might not reopen our borders. Wake the fuck up. Think about it. Don't let people have control over your life and over you. Just don't do it. And if you let them do it enough, and they'll never give it back, ever. You ever gonna climb that mountain in Ethiopia? Yeah, that was it was a Abuna Yamada Go, or something like that. I forget the exact way of pronouncing it. It's in the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia. It's actually a church that's 1,500 years old, and it's really amazing. It's built into this cliff That's about 600 meters high, and you have to climb for about 2 hours barefoot and even scale walls to get to it. And then the final part of the climb is there's a ledge that's only 50 centimeters wide, and if you fall off, you fall 600 meters to your death, and you have to kind of crawl the ledge to get into the church. And the curator of the church in Ethiopia, he's been doing that for 47 years and did the climb every single day, up and down, climbing down during the nighttime. There are some amazing stories in Ethiopia, and it's deeply connected to Christian culture. The church there was formed 400 or 500 AD. In general, Ethiopia is one of my favorite places in the world. It's an ancient country with a long tradition, a lot of history, and just amazing people, deeply religious people. They'll take quite a bit of time. Some of them will walk days or weeks barefoot just to get to a holy site for Christmas. Come on, guys, give me some good questions. Well, just nothing good. I guess this is where we'll cut it. So, like all my AMAs, let's get to the next part of the show. And that part of the show is we'll go ahead and share the screen. Kiva, entire screen. Boom. Wow. There we go. Okay. So, for you new people, Kiva is a microfinance site and basically allows you to make loans. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing to log in. And after I've logged in, so here, sign in to Kiva. Sign in with my Google. The Google. After I log in, we're going to go ahead and lend out. So first off, we'll take a look at my portfolio. So we'll share the screen again. Sharing screen. Ba-dum-ba-dum. Okay, so let's see how the loan portfolio is doing right now. Dozoa. And so we have Togo, we have Senegal, Cambodia, Mexico, Rosa, and in Kenya, and in Peru. And look at that. All of them except for the Senegal are paying back, but the Senegal was recently, so I think it'll be a little while for that. But that's not bad. That's pretty cool. Okay, so let's go ahead take a look who we're going to give to. Philippines. And my assistant sometimes picks out people for me. So, aha. All right. This is the gal, and let's read her story. Annalisa is 43 years old. She's married and has 5 children, 2 of her children in school. She raises pigs in the Philippines and has been in business for 8 years. She will use the loan to buy piglets, sacks of feed, and supplies to raise her pigs. She successfully repaid her previous loan and now has requested new 13,000 pesos loan through the NWTF to further build her business. In the future, she would like to save enough money to send her children to college. Okay, that's exciting. Well, let's finish this out. Proceed to checkout. Okay, we always do the donation to Kiva, complete order. And there we go. She now has the loan, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the portfolio. She's 100% funded, ready to go. All right, Annalisa in the Philippines, I wish you well. I hope everything works well. One day we shall do this on Cardano, hopefully soon, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully it'll be an investment. Right now, these loans are charity. So the best case scenario is I get my money back, but if they don't repay, I don't. But microfinance, where you can actually make a return, it will become part of my company's treasury management, and we'll allocate a percentage of the overall cash the company has to microfinance loans. And if we do it right, we can actually get a better return than most bonds in that respect. And if we can do that, other companies shall do that. And it'll result in billions of dollars of direct foreign investment into some of the people who need, most of the people who need it. So I'm very excited about that prospect. Thank you guys so much for coming to my AMA. It's a great way to end the day. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Cheers.